If you like being fast, doing absolutely insane damage, and filling the screen with explosions from multiple different skills, then I can absolutely recommend Falcon Bomber. This isn't necessarily the easiest build to play on Falconer, as it's a hybrid of Explosive Ballista and Dive Bomb, so you're combining mechanics from different skills. However, it is super satisfying and rewarding. I think as long as you're going to like 300-400 corruption, most people can pilot the build no problem, and as you push beyond that to 500, 600, 700, you'll have plenty of time to practice. Just try to avoid tanking things too much in that high corruption, as if this build does have any weakness, it is probably the defenses. That said, if you set things up correctly, you definitely won't be feeling squishy in lower corruption either. In fact, I played this build from level 1 all the way to Empowered Monoliths, and a fair bit into Empowered Monoliths with only one death, despite not being res capped for most of the journey. That one death was at like level 12. So, you win some and you lose some. I couldn't have done it on hardcore, but maybe with a little practice I would have. It was an absolutely great starter build, meaning you need no gear at all to get going. You can just pick up random trash from the floor, and ultimately, what you end up with is an amazing build, easily one of the best that I've played. If you want to learn more about target farming in Last Epoch, or find out what I'm playing next, do be sure to get subscribed, leave a like while you're down there. And for now, let's get into a few of the details, starting with gameplay and rotation. Basically, if you have a question, it'll probably be answered in that section. Then moving on to passives, skills, gearing, and wrapping things up with my gameplay experiences. So first up, let's go over your basic gameplay rotation. On single target, it's a little bit different from when clearing, because when you're clearing, you'll very often want your enemies to be right towards the edge of your screen. So imagine these are dangerous enemies. I'd be firing like this and watching my Ballista destroy it from a distance. And maybe I drop a Dive Bomb Falcon as well. On the other hand, for single target, you begin by dropping a Smoke Bomb. Then, as soon as the boss becomes active, you spam Explosive Trap, dodge any abilities with Shift, and drop the bird for tons of damage. You want to drop the bird as close to melee range as possible so that you can take advantage of all the Shadow Falcons. And also remember to watch your mana. Dive Bomb doesn't cost any, but Explosive Trap absolutely does. Now normally, your minions don't scale off of your stats. However, there's a few very big exceptions to this, and these come in the form of passives that say your minions scale off of your stats, which luckily both the Falcon and the Ballista possess. So in addition to stacking dexterity to massively increase minion damage, your own damage stats and even crit/crit multi are going to be important. Just remember, Morning Frost is a significant tax on your defenses, and you'll have to pay special attention to both cold and physical res. I also found that 20 or 21 mana regen was the most comfortable. Before that, I'd spam Explosive Trap for a while, and then I'd be able to Dive Bomb, and Explosive Trap, and Dive Bomb, but eventually I'd run out of mana. I found once I got some mana regen rolls, this smoothed out very nicely, and I was able to keep spamming it until the boss ran out of health. Now, that isn't to say that if you mismanage your mana entirely, you won't run out occasionally, and when clearing if I'm very greedy and just kind of dry firing, that does happen. With 20 or 21 mana regen, it's really smooth. The last very important thing to keep in mind is one of your best defenses is Silver Shroud. This causes you to dodge the next hit entirely. That means that none of the damage gets through. That also means dots negate your best defense. You get this from two ways. If Coordinated Fade is off cooldown when you shift, you'll get a Silver Shroud. No matter how many you have, it absorbs the next hit. The stacks just determine how much ward you get. Alternatively, you can press Smoke Bomb. Use these two in rotation to maintain maximum invulnerability, or pseudo-invulnerability, since the actual invulnerability would come from specializing Shift, which if you think you need more defenses, you can do, just keep in mind it will tax your damage. Last up, remember that as a Falconer, your minions gain crit multi based on your own crit avoid, so stacking extra crit avoid even over 100% really isn't that bad of an idea. Next up, I'm going to talk about my gearing choices. Feel free to use the chapters to jump back and forth to sections that you're interested in. And if you want to know more about the gearing choices in depth, including a best in slot list that I'm kind of playing around with, then I'll have a planner that's a public build over on Maxwell and in my Discord. So let's start talking about skills, passives, and gearing, something that I've changed quite a lot throughout the course of this build. First up, in Rogue. The points that you absolutely must take are Steady Hand, then 1 point in Guile, 5 in Evasion, 1 in Agility. 5 in Agility. There we go. The reason you need these is, well, it gets you to 19 points, then you put 1 point either in Dodge and Parry or Sapping Strikes. After that, you're free to move on to Blade Dancer, Marksman, or Falconer. I ended up coming back and putting a few more into dodge and parry, though I'm kind of tempted to grab 1 point for something else which I'll get into when I talk about Falconer. Now for auxiliary points, this is after you've filled out most of your Falconer tree, but I'll get into it quickly here. Cloak of Shadows, it's Dex and Glancing Blow chance. And then in Marksman, 1 point into Woundmaker. What I'm tempted to do is actually steal 1 point from dodge and parry and put it over into Woundmaker for 2 points, so I stack crit vuln a little more efficiently and get bigger crits. Or I guess more crits, not bigger ones. Then coming over into Falconer herself. First up, Handler. This gives you base crit on your Falcon and Ballista. Next up, I went into Outlander's Tenacity, before going up to Ranger's Mark, Stamina of a Rover, and rounding things out with Agile Hunt. I'm not super worried about the Falconer getting extra throwing damage here, but it is quite nice, so I did take the 5-point bonus. Over here, I grabbed some optional defenses with Deflect and Weave. I don't think this is super important to have, but it does feel nice as you start pushing Corruption. Alternatively, you could go with Poise, I believe. I think there's enough points here. Evasion Tactics is very important. Not only does it give dodge rating and armor, which are nice passive defenses, but it gives dex. And, even better, it unlocks a ton of healing from Relentless Talons, plus Stymphalian Feathers for a little bit of extra armor. But as you push into higher corruption, these defenses matter less and less. Instead, you rely more on Coordinated Fade, where you get Silver Shroud on ability use. Intuitive Connection is really good, so that the Falcon abilities are instant cast. Don't worry, they basically don't have a cooldown anyway. Needle-like Precision is a ton of stats for your minion. Finesse Femme is good amount of crit avoid, and it lets you scale your Falcon and Ballista damage off of the crit avoid that you have. More on that in the gearing section. Last up, Tailwind for basically just extra move speed, a little dodge. The effects are going to always be doubled. Yeah, really good passive defenses. Now, this is not the sort of build where you can face tank. It's much more about keeping yourself alive to the point where you can take exactly 1 hit. Then actually, I'm probably going to drop Deflect and Weave soon to instead take Poise. That way, I should always have the first hit that makes it through be a Glancing Blow, which should give me just enough health to survive. But this felt pretty darn good in lower corruption, which is why I wanted to keep it in for the video, showcase it, and talk about it. If you look at the planner over on Maxwell GG, it's probably already going to be updated to the Poise version. Next up, let's talk about skill allocations, starting with Smoke Bomb, my utility skill. Now, you can either use Smoke Bomb or you can use Shift. For low corruption, I actually preferred Shift, just because that way I can spec into lowering its cooldown, get a little bit of extra dodge, and even grab a cleanse or a free potion use. All that's pretty good. As I got to higher corruption and needed more single target though, Smoke Bomb became the best choice. First of all, you have Umbral Assault, so you spawn shadows. This is going to be very important after you see the Dive Bomb tree. Second of all, Smoke Blades, which gives you a bunch of melee and throwing damage, which as far as I can understand, does get transferred over to the Falcon. And it also gets transferred to your Ballista, which I don't know if the explosion counts as throwing or melee exactly, but yes. Never looked into it because they did enough damage and I was primarily scaling my Falcon. They're just nice icing on the cake. But Moonlight Bomb is incredibly important. This is a second source of Silver Shroud. Silver Shroud gives you a 100% chance to dodge an attack. In other words, functional damage immunity on a cooldown. And so your goal is to rotate between Smoke Bomb and shifting, or whatever button you happen to use for Coordinated Fade, so that you have near invulnerability when you're playing perfectly. Any hit that you fail to dodge, in this case, fail to dodge as in you the person avoid it, you will dodge through your Silver Shroud. Though the downside of this is it's pretty easy to misplay and absolutely get obliterated by an Orbis or a Julra. That said, the build does have 2.5k health, overall good defenses, and until you get to 400 or 500 corruption, it's not going to feel squishy at all. Here we have the Falconry tree. The name of the game here is to get as many buffs as possible so that you can then apply all of those buffs to your Dive Bomb. So keeping that in mind, it's mostly spec'd for utility. Though there's Falconer's Journey because that's global damage, so at level 100, with a little under 100 dex, that's about 100% more and 100% more. I don't quite know why that node exists, it's way too broken. Then, marking strikes is really important. for Avian Arsenal. When you consume Falconer's Mark with, say, your Blast Rain Explosive Trap, you get 30% of your added melee, throwing, bow, or spell damage, which in the case of Explosive Trap is a throwing ability turned bow, so it probably uses bow. And yeah, that's a little bit unethical. Also, I came over to Bird of Prey. It's pretty easy to fully stack Boss DR, so why not just kill them instantly instead? Then coming down here, Train to Hunt, very important. Go for the Eyes, also very important. And Expose Weakness. The goal is to transfer as many of your own damage stats over to your Falcon. Because again, a lot of these are global buffs. They don't say your Falcon strikes gets, they say your Falcon gets, which means it applies to Falconry, Avian Assault, and Dive Bomb. Next up, we have Explosive Trap, which is primarily buffs and utility. So the goal is to throw as many traps as possible. Your traps through Siege Engineering spawn Ballistae. And instead of throwing traps, I'm using Blast Rain with Impact Trigger. Now, throwing traps allows you to do something like wear Apogee and a shield. It's much more defensive and honestly will probably push Corruption farther. But personally, I found the Blast Rain playstyle to be faster, more fluid, and smoother. In other words, it felt better to me. And I haven't found a point where my build is falling off, even at around 500 Corruption. If anything, my attention span is falling off before my build is, because I can't get these darn blessings that I want. More on that in the blessing section. The other really important thing from Explosive Trap is Sky Signal. Sky Signal means that you have about 30 stacks of 3% pen, so 100% pen, whenever you're dealing with a boss, and Free Lofting Bird helps further reduce the cooldowns of your Dive Bomb and Falcon strikes. Last up, Trappist allows you to throw 3 traps instead of 1, or I guess shoot them, and then they instantly explode. Yeah, removing the delay is why Impact Trigger Blast Rain feels so good, and I want to use it on everything. Next up, we have the Big Skill. This is most of your damage, and it is super impressive. Those crits that you saw earlier in the video, yep, those were primarily from Dive Bomb, because it hits like a truck. So here's a few things that I found, speccing it all sorts of different ways. First up, Cloud Gatherer is really nice because it allows you to extend your Smoke Bomb. In fact, it extends your Smoke Bomb so much as you keep spamming Falcons that it basically has an infinite duration. I also really like Rapid Pursuit, not only for extra mana on boss and rare hits, but lowering the cooldown of my traversal skills. And there's a couple ways that you can spec this. You can either go the Big Bonk route, or you can do the Shadow Falcon route, with On Wings of Shadow. Now, there's a little more setup to this version, but I found the damage to be absolutely incredible, because I have the main Falcon hit, 3 Shadow Falcons, and then, thanks to Dancing Shadows, the 3 Shadow Falcons dive again, at which point, my Dive Bomb is probably off cooldown, and so then I'm just going to keep looping it over and over and over again. It was a night and day difference when I swapped over to this setup. I felt tankier because I was doing way more damage on bosses. Though I have to admit, the earlier setups that I was using with a fully spec'd shift did work better when clearing, so if I wasn't lazy, I'd probably just constantly respec these. And finally, Ballista. I would very much recommend getting +2 to the Ballista level so you can fill out some of these important passives. The first thing is, because you're playing a dex stack build, you need Armed Construction, for at 100 dex, 800% more damage, and 400% more area. Also, it makes your Ballista explode, which is screen wide, so you can throw your traps or fire your traps towards the edge of a screen. Then the Ballista goes off at the edge of a screen, wiping out enemies before you even see them. That's how this build pushes into higher and higher corruption. Does it get tedious? Yes. Is it extremely safe? Also yes. And that's why I say my attention span is probably going to give out before the build does. You also want efficient construction to lower the mana cost as much as possible, and then go into things like shared enhancements, your damage modifiers, all the things that say increased damage, flat damage, blah, blah, blah. Now apply to the Ballista at 75% effect. Also, sharpened tips, you get crit strike chance, and you transfer over all of your crit chance and crit multi. So there's quite a bit of double dipping going on here, where you're transferring your stats not only to your Falcon, which goes to Dive Bomb, but also to Ballista, making this an incredibly efficient build, and that's why the numbers get so big. Alright, time to get into my idols, blessings, and gear. Starting with my pride and joy, the Talons of Valor. This is a really nice bow, but not the only thing you can use. Realistically, you want a bow that has high critical strike chance, such as the base crit on Talons, and the hybrid crit mod. You also want either minion melee damage or bow damage, meaning melee/bow transfers over at a far better ratio. But the bow cold damage is also quite good. That could be crit multi as well, and that just depends on your gear. If you have a lot of crit multi elsewhere, then it's probably not as good. That's why I opted for this. But if you're lacking crit multi elsewhere, then maybe go with it on your weapon. A regular old Dreadthorn bow is a pretty good option as an alternative. And there's another weapon, I believe it's Flight of the First, which, while it has a higher LPL than Talons of Valor, is also quite powerful. What I like about this is it gives me extra levels in both Dive Bomb and Falconry, and it's especially important to have those +3 in Dive Bomb, so this way I don't need it anywhere else on gear. The only other unique item that I would say you really need is Morning Frost. This gives 1 cold damage to attacks and spells per dexterity, which again gets transferred to all of your minions. The problem is, it wrecks your cold res and your fizz res, as in, right now I'm basically capped. Oh look, I'm 100 over cap. Yeah, I'm losing about 100 res. Now, there are a couple of other uniques that I would recommend if you can get them well rolled / with LP. First up, Peak of a Mountain. I haven't turned this into a legendary yet, but it's a great way to get a ton of crit. Unfortunately, you can't leech from crit strikes, but that isn't particularly relevant to this build anyway, and you even get attributes aka Dex. So that's really good. You can farm it in the Lightless Arbor, and 1 LP or 2 LP. This is farmed in Fall of the Outcast, and I believe this is the hero on Age of Winter. Now on my helmet, I'm going for increased health, Dex, Void Res. I'd probably have to give up the Fire Res, which is fine. At the moment, I really can't do without at least the increased health. It's a lot of defenses. So if I was going for a Peak of a Mountain, I'd farm a bunch of these with increased health, try to transfer that over. That word gained when you create a shadow, by the way, not actually a really good affix. You should have dive bomb damage and AoE. Really good affix, I just didn't get to hit it here, and I've been too scared to try to gamble annulling it. Maybe later. Now, a chest piece alternative is Woven Flesh, which you'll get a lot of, especially with LP in Fall of the Outcast. Unfortunately, I have yet to successfully transfer percent increased health over to a Woven Flesh. The good news is it gives you 100% crit avoid, which is crit multi for your minions, and also just crit avoid, a nice stat to have, though you'll have over 100% anyway, assuming that you follow the blessings that I recommend. So if I could transfer this over, I definitely use it. What I really want is good percent health and dex, or dive bomb levels and percent health, that I can use crit avoid on my bow. Sadly, this hit, but it wasn't T7, and it wasn't enough to get the 12%. I really wanted the 20 or 30. Made a difference in the case of hundreds, and it was the difference between getting one shot occasionally and tanking things. Then for the amulet, get a bone amulet. Don't go for a damaging amulet like a minion amulet. It's way too greedy in my opinion. Mana regen, crit multi, minion damage, all good stats. Crit chance, also good. Suffixes, really whatever you need, but try to get life, maybe even get frailty chance. For quiver, you could go with an arrow guard. I was using this for a while. Sadly, it didn't hit any damage stats, which is why I'm not using it currently. Bow fizz damage dex, chance to shred. I think chance to shred is pretty nice on an exalted quiver as a sealed mod. This definitely isn't ideal, but the dex and bow fizz or bow attack speed are very, very good. And ideally, you'd want a crit multi base so that you can transfer more crit multi over to your minions. This is kind of a filler item because I was in the middle of farming up another arrow guard. Honestly, I don't think arrow guard's worth it, and I'm probably just going to farm for a good crit multi quiver. On rings, I really like mana regen. For suffixes, it's any defensive stats that you can get. And as you can see, this ring is not very good, but it caps my res, so it's fine. This ring is quite good. The sealed throwing damage was from when I was doing the throwing trap version. Don't worry about it here. It's not relevant to the build anymore. But I do really like getting fizz res, ideally T6, but if you can get T7, that's cool. The reason that I say ideally T6 is farming for T7 rings that are also good is a huge pain. You'll get there eventually. T6 is fine. Worry about T7s elsewhere, such as on your chest piece, where the 35% health is an absolutely massive difference. For belt, I got a T7 hybrid health, and I've just been kind of stuck with it. Didn't come out particularly well. I'd been trying to seal that minion damage, and the Glyphs of Despair just did not cooperate, unfortunately. But hey, getting T7 hybrid health is really sweet, so I've stuck with it. Now, on my relic, I've got the +2 to Ballista. That's very, very nice. I kind of built the item around that. I did happen to get Exalted Mana Regen. Getting to 21 Mana Regen, like I mentioned near the start, is quite important. Then I just filled in with resistances that I needed. And the crit chance is always good, plus health on crit, can't complain. Last up, again, Mana Regen stuff here, with crit chance, dexterity, hybrid health, cold res. So TLDR of gearing. For your suffixes, try to get things like resistances until you cap, crit avoid, percent health, hybrid health, health. For your prefixes, mana regen until you get to around 20 or 21. Dexterity is really important. Skill levels for the specific skills like Dive Bomb, Ballista, those are good. Try to get the Dive Bomb AoE and damage on your helmet. Minion damage is okay. Crit multi is very good. Crit chance is good. And hopefully that gives you a rough idea of how to gear your character. Additionally, for idols, I mostly just went with defensive ones, getting vitality, life, and resistances. A couple of these need improvement, and I am using one damage idol because it rolled really, really well, and it felt too good to pass up. Though if I started dying, I probably could, honestly. And that might be the difference between 2.5 and 3k life. Next up, we have blessings. So, I'm not going to worry too much about the loot blessings because those are whatever you need to farm at the time. But in terms of the stat blessings, you want Grand Emptiness of Ash from the Black Sun. Crit multi is strong, try to get more of it. Now from Lagan, I'm right now using Grand Light of the Moon because mana feels pretty good. You could use this to get resistance as well though. Grand Survival of Might, very important. This is not only damage, remember it's crit multi for your minions, but this is how you cap, though I would recommend it. Then we have this. You want the Armor Blessing. It doesn't want to give me the Armor Blessing, so I grabbed Endurance. But also, Endurance isn't bad, and realistically, there's going to come a point where neither Armor nor Endurance matter, so at that point, YOLO damage? I don't know. Haven't gotten to that point. I've not gotten to the full glass cannon point, so I found the Endurance to be quite helpful. Oh, and last but definitely not least, Grand Resolve of Grail to get all that nice Phys Res. This is very much how I'm remaining capped on my Phys Res. If you are struggling for resistances, don't be afraid to get them through blessings with this build. Leveling this build was incredibly smooth. I mostly just grabbed life and dexterity. You should grab resistances, but I didn't, and it also really didn't punish me. Then, transitioning into early monoliths, I kept thinking, alright, well, my res isn't capped. I'll start feeling squishy soon. I haven't upgraded my gear all that well. My damage will probably fall off. And it didn't. Until I got to Empowered Monos, and around 200 to 300 corruption, I did start dying a bit, and had to go cap my resistances. The next point where I ended up with a little bit of a struggle was when I got to around 450 corruption. This time, it was in part because I kept lagging out, and in part because I hadn't really updated my defenses. Or more accurately, I had done so in a way that wasn't quite working. I was trying to stack block and glancing blows to get a 100% chance to have a glancing blow. I found out that actually I'd just get more health by literally stacking more health, so I really focused in on those percent health and hybrid health mods, and my health pool went all the way up to 2.5k. I think with a little more attention to that, I could probably hit 3 or maybe even 3.2, but 2.5 felt comfy for my current corruption. It also felt like, unfortunately, legendary items were a little bit of a trap sometimes. Some of them were absolutely awesome, but then others weren't worth it over just having 4 stats on an exalted item. The build damage scales incredibly well, so most of the micromanaging that I did was paying attention to my mana and adding my defenses. Because after all, while you can just shoot everything from off the edge of a screen, that's a really, really boring playstyle. And so instead, I much preferred to confront enemies a little bit more directly. This is why I was aggressively using Silver Shrouds for my defenses. I didn't exactly go into this build blind, which is very atypical for me. And I also did play it offline for a good reason, mostly that the servers were constantly exploding. The reason I didn't go into it completely blind is because I played it a bit when I made my CT preview video. Normally for me, League Start or Season Start is a time to play something that I've never played before. And in this case, yes, it did very much work out playing something I knew, but I'm probably not going to repeat it. Next time there's a new cycle, I'm going to be playing something that I haven't played before, or at least haven't played in a while, to dive in and have that experience of trying something new. Really, the only part of my gearing that was incredibly frustrating was farming the blessings. I just couldn't get what I wanted most of the time, so I had to settle for things that were mediocre, or suitable for right now and nothing else. Yeah, it's a very frustrating system. I really wish there's a slight way to improve it. One thing, though, that definitely did not feel like settling was the loot. I went Circle of Fortune since, being offline, there was no reason to try to go Merchant's Guild and then trade with who? Myself? I don't actually know if that works at all. I haven't tried it. Let me know down below if you have. The loot was just starting to get ridiculous, even before Prophecies being doubled at rank 10. I can absolutely say this is the fastest that I've progressed, and this is the time where I've had the most items for other builds. There are so many things that I got at 2, 3, and 4 LP that I could use to put together entire other builds. And so if the servers don't get fixed anytime soon, don't worry, I'm going to be playing endless Falconer builds, like Shadow Dagger Falconer, or possibly Exploding Dummy Falconer, since I did just get a 4 LP and 3 LP Kelthin's Blasting Agent, basically dropping together. Yeah, Circle of Fortune is completely absurd. At some point, I would like to make an online character. But here's the thing. I've been around for a lot of launches, and having server issues is really frustrating. You just want to log in and game, and it's even worse when you're streaming. Hell, it would even be worse if I was trying to make this video and test all the content and get it done when the servers just aren't working. So, to avoid that stress, I simply went offline. And I'm going to keep playing this character offline until the server issues are resolved. Once they are, I'll go online with the next build, and probably use it as an excuse to try something new, like a Wardlock, or maybe that Blast Rain Marksman, which, while I could technically play right now because I have a lot of the gear for it, I don't actually want to reroll and re-level. Instead, I'll reroll as something that doesn't require me to level up or push corruption a second time. If you want a handy reference, you can always join my Discord, or look at the build over on MaxwellGG, where it is public. Now, when it comes to defenses on this build, I was really hesitant, because part of me wants to say, you'll feel like you're invincible for a very long time, and part of me wants to say, you'll get one-tapped, be careful, because it's kind of both. Silver Shroud will make you feel deceptively tanky, and Silver Shroud will make you feel deceptively squishy. Because the build has incredible damage, anytime you're feeling squishy, the best thing to do is to take a little bit out of damage, maybe lose some dex, maybe don't use a Falconer helmet, and go into defenses. So you'll need to do a lot of adjustments to highlight gear on the fly. Which then leads into the question that I'm sure is going to be spammed in the comments. Do you have a loot filter for the build? I have a loot filter in my Discord for my specific character. That probably won't work for you unless you're literally wearing my gear. That said, I did make a video on how you can quickly and efficiently put together a loot filter which you can use for any build, basically the system I use for highlighting. If you feel comfortable with that system, you can always go into the filter in my Discord and change some of the rules. Because for me personally, if the choice is make a super complicated, highly in-depth loot filter or never use a loot filter again, yeah, I'm just never using a loot filter again. I hate that stuff. So I'm going to keep it simple and customize it to my gear, and you're welcome to do the same. But hey, if you're feeling really lazy, you can either go to the Maxwell Dive Bomb Falconer or Explosive Ballista Falconer and just yoink the loot filter from there. That's definitely going to be good enough. I just prefer to hide more things, because as it turns out, Circle of Fortune drops way too much loot. And so in short, the Dive Bomb Falconer. It's fast, it hits really hard, and it's reasonably tanky. You could say it's the build that does it all. And with that said, I'm curious, what sort of builds do you enjoy in Last Epoch? For me, it's really hard to describe exactly what I like, but I definitely know what I don't like, and that's clunky things that require a lot of button presses in very specific orders. I don't mind pressing buttons if I can just spam them, and I don't mind having a button to press if a need arises, but I don't want to have to do A to B to C to F to C, i.e. Runic Invocation builds, which is why I haven't played any. But I'm curious to hear some of your thoughts down below as well. Now with that said, I'd like to take a minute to thank my patrons and channel members for the continued support. For as little as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible. Link to support is also down below. And also, a big thanks to everyone who watched until the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed. I know this one ended up taking a little bit longer, but smoke bomb testing was a little last minute. I wasn't using it for a lot of my progression, and I found it to be really good, so I kind of had to redo everything. Sometimes it happens, but hey, hopefully you learned something from the end result, and I'll see you again in the next one.